Adelante, profesor.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I am Jean-Pierre Seclen, and you are welcome to Master Conference on Research on Knowledge-Intensive Business Services, Future Challenges. So before I started, I would like to give some brief suggestions to the audience on the dynamic of this conference. After the keynote speaker finish, please raise your hand and write in the chat for your questions. Okay, so now it is an honor to me to have here to Ian Miles, who is Emeritus Professor at the University of Manchester. After working at the Science Public Research Unit at Sussex University for 18 years, he joined it to press. This is a program of policy research in engineering, science, and technology in 1990. His research interests and methods are wide-ranging. Much of his work on technological innovation has concerned new information technologies. Apart from analysis of services in general questions, Professor Miles is particularly associated with knowledge-intensive business services. He's pioneering research into this industry. Research covers both managerial and policy dimensions of these issues, and use tools such as case studies and survey analysis. He was a director of PRESS and a founding director of CRIC, the Center for Research on Innovation and Competition, both now assimilated into Manchester Institute of Innovation Research. His work has been carried out for many sponsors, including Economic and Social Research Council, UK government departments, foreign government departments, international organizations, and private companies. As well as he's producing numerous reports. He has written over 150 book chapters and over 100 journal articles. As I said before, it is an honor to me to present Professor Miles here. Professor Miles, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, let's get started, please.
It's an honor for me to be here. My greetings to everyone in Lima. My apologies for speaking in English. My Spanish is rather poor.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, I've prepared a presentation of about 30 minutes. So should I begin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Right. Let me try sharing my screen. Okay. Well, I hope that this will continue to work. I was asked to talk about future challenges for research on knowledge-intensive business services. Immediately, my screen is not moving. I'm trying to see the next slide, and it's not displaying. I will tell you what the next slide covers. It covers 4 main features of knowledge-intensive business services. One thing is that they are, of course, knowledge-intensive. They're typically very reliant upon expert knowledge. They use their knowledge to produce services that support the business processes. And it may be the business processes of private firms. It may be the business processes of public agencies and even governments. It may be the business processes of large charities and other sorts of foundations. These play a very important role in some societies. And these knowledge-intensive business services have been becoming increasingly important in many of the Western industrial countries. And research shows that they becoming important in many regions of the world. And a large part of the reason for this is that knowledge has become very important in our economies and our societies more generally. With increasingly sophisticated technologies, with increasingly complicated linkages between production and consumption of all sorts of activities, with the development of regulatory systems and administrative systems of many sorts, the call for knowledge is very, very high. And knowledge-intensive business services are helping organizations access specialized knowledge to confront the various business problems that they encounter. I'm going to try to show, the next slide. And what we're getting right now is just this slide increasing in size. I'm going to have to do this in another way. I will show you the next slide. Oh, there we are. It's working. And now it's gone on too far. Okay, well, the slide we just jumped past was a slide just outlining different sorts of knowledge-intensive business services, which we can classify in terms of whether they are dealing with knowledge more to do with science and technology. So we have research services, computer services, information service, engineering, testing, architectural services, a lot of different activities here. All of them involving a great deal of knowledge of some sorts of technical systems. We have the traditional professional business services. And this is one area where there has been research for a very long period of time. The classic professions like accountancy services and auditing services, legal services, and a more recent arrival, mainly 20th century arrival, consulting services, management consultancy of one sort or another. So dealing with professional knowledge, and then other activities whose knowledge is typically more to do with creativity, aesthetics, cultural issues. We call these CKIBs, design services, market research services, advertising services, and there are all sorts of other things hidden away here. And then a category of other professional technical services. So, for example, technical translation is one of the services here. And these categories of activities are often put together in the big statistical systems that we have, such as the NACE system in Europe, which the European Union uses to classify statistics of industry activities and employment and the like. A very wide range of activities. They're organized in different ways. Very often they don't just draw on different sorts of knowledge, but they're organized in different ways. Typically, they're smaller organizations than we're used to seeing in manufacturing, for example. But always there are a few large global firms, typically serving large global clients and international markets. And although we talk about these three different sorts of knowledge service, it's very common that a KIBS firm working in any of these areas will need some skills in other areas. It's very obviously the case if you have a sector like architecture, where architects have to take account of design issues, of legal issues, of financial issues, and so on. But it's true for almost all of these services. If you look at one of these industries, you will find people with skills, with expertise in different sorts of knowledge. So this has become a topic of research, really taking off in the last 30 years. And we have a huge amount of research on these topics. And several systematic literature reviews have been conducted of the main areas of work in these fields. One of the most important areas that these reviews always identify is innovation. We see that KIBs play a very important role in giving knowledge to their clients that their clients can use in their own innovation processes. So there are other topics that are of great importance, but we can see where the major lines of work so far have been. But I was asked to talk about future areas of work. And I want to move on from looking to see what people have mainly been looking at in the past to thinking about some areas that have not been addressed sufficiently, where it will be very good to have more information provided. So I've identified 5 areas of this sort. And I'm now once again trying to get my computer to move on the page and failing to get it to move. Right, the first of these areas. Well, one thing I think is we need much more comparative research. We have studies carried out in England, we have studies carried out in Germany, we have studies carried out in the Netherlands, in France, we have studies carried out in Latin American countries, in Australia. There's been quite a lot of studies carried out in China recently. But I'm very cautious about whether we can generalize the results from one country to another country in a very straightforward way. And one reason for this is that we have some evidence that KIBs function differently in different contexts. So in some cultures, for example, we may find that it is the client that tells the KIB exactly what to do. And it would expect the KIBs firm just to conduct the procedures that the client is asking for. Where in other cases, the client goes along to the KIBs firm with a problem and says to the firm, do you understand this problem? Can you help us define this problem? What sorts of solutions would you propose for this? Much more open-minded approach. This probably varies from sector to sector, from industry to industry, from different KIBs. It may be different from what you ask an auditing firm to do to what you ask a computer services firm to do, for example, and may also differ across countries and cultures. So I'm cautious about generalizing results from one place to another. We need more comparative studies. Some countries have a lot of studies, some have very, very few. And we need to see how the patterns of KIBs development, when they're used, why they're used, how they're used in different cultural contexts. So more comparative research, that's one big challenge. And I think there are a couple of things that will be good to explore here. One is an issue which I've been trying to grapple with using international statistics. We see that the pattern of use of KIBs varies a lot from country to country. It's generally the case that as countries get richer, then more of their economy is involved in KIBs activities. KIBs become more important parts of their economies. But which KIBs are becoming most important isn't always the same. The pattern in France is different from the pattern in Italy, is different from the pattern in the United Kingdom. What explains this? There's a big question there. It's not just a result of our industrial structures in the different countries. And that much we know. The second thing I think is important is that this is an area of research where we might be looking for post-colonial research, research conducted by people other than the Westerners like me, who've been doing the bulk of this research in the past. I'm really happy to see that there are studies coming from several Latin American countries in this field. And it's not just research that we need. I mean, there may be different questions asked. There may be different sorts of action required. And there is a rather pervasive and persuasive line of analysis suggesting that international KIBs firms may be imposing solutions developed in the West on other societies, other cultures, other economies, where these solutions are not so appropriate. So maybe a better dialogue between the KIBs sector and the recipient societies is required. Maybe it's a matter of developing your own KIBs sectors much more effectively in developing societies. Some countries have developed very powerful KIBS industries. Japan has several, India has several, for example. Now China is coming up with industries in the computer sector and in research and development that are very important. This could be a good growth opportunity, and it could also lead to innovations that are much more relevant to local economies and local societies and local needs. So that would be the first area I'd identify as important. A second area is an ongoing problem with KIBS research. I'm having an ongoing problem getting my next slide to display. But the challenge that we often face, here we go, when we're looking at KIBS, is that we have studies mainly of the KIBS industries themselves. We have a few studies that focus on user industries. We have very few studies, other than some wonderful but limited case studies, which look at both the supplier and the client, and what the interaction between supplier and client is in the creation, or what people will call co-production of the service, which is involved in the KIBS. So there is a process which I depict here by this helix of relationships, where there are touch points. Someone in the KIBS firm is making contact with someone in the KIBS client in some way. There's exchange of information and knowledge. There's scope for mutual learning. The KIBS firm can learn about the problems and the different sorts of clients that they're working with, and the clients can learn about how KIBS go about coming up with solutions, what solutions are, maybe how to avoid the problems in the first place. Mutual learning processes, very important for the development of innovations. So actually finding ways of studying the interaction between KIBS and their clients is very important. And we have to understand that the typical KIBS service activity is a process. It's not just an existing product that you deliver, as you might be delivering a good. So that's a second body of work. And this one's a real challenge, but finding ways of examining the interactions seems to me to be really important. And the third area that I'll be looking at is the issue. Well, for a long time, I've been interested in the topic of customization. For a long time, researchers were saying KIBS produce customized services. But if you talk to KIBS themselves, a lot of them were saying, we're doing more or less standard things. Yes, we provided different output for each client, but we're engaging in basically the same activities. We're taking the information they give us, we're processing it, and we're feeding the results back to them, for example. Some KIBS say that most of their work is standardized. A minority of KIBS will say that almost all of their work is customized. Most KIBS report a mixture of standardized and customized services. And well, it's interesting business questions about why they're adopting particular strategies here and what capabilities they require for this. But it's a question which is changing all the time, because what we see very recently is that many KIBS firms talk about what they're doing as providing a platform, and they're allowing their clients to help specify the service they want on a platform. It's very much like the mass customization strategies that we see in a lot of manufacturing industries. The clients can select bits and pieces of a service. That's nothing like it's highly customized. They're not one-off services of the sorts that people often think about when they talk about custom production of services. So I would specify a third area of work as being one of looking into the different forms of customization and standardization that KIBS are adopting, understanding why they're doing this, what sorts of innovations they require to do this, how this affects their subsequent innovation processes. Are some KIBS adopting more more standardization strategies, some KIBs adopting more customization strategies? Is it perhaps the standardization strategies are aimed at more mass markets and the customization strategies are aimed at more value-added elite markets? Or is that too simple? So that's the third area of work. I've got two more to get through very quickly because I've already been talking for 25 minutes, I see. So again, trying to get my slide to move on. The fourth issue is about transformation of professional activities in KIBs. We know that there's a great deal of innovative activity going on within many KIBs firms. It's always been very, very evident in the technology-based KIBs. And now we can see it happening in professional services and in cultural and creative services. I've been working myself with an a law company that's been developing tools to assist experts in their judgment, not automation of professional work, but augmentation of professional work by providing decision support tools, so that when they're dealing with particular cases and particular issues, these legal service professionals can rapidly find out what similar cases have been undertaken by their firm, how these cases have been handled, what the results of these cases have been. This sort of tool, which seems to be proving very successful within the company. Now, there's a lot of effort to apply these new digital tools within many professional services, within creative services, within technical services. What does this mean for work in these industries? Is it going to lead to a change in the ratio of workers, for example, between professionals and paraprofessionals and administrative staff? Will it change the tasks that the different categories of workers are undertaking? Will there be challenges from new entrants, people offering to provide, for example, to provide services very, very cheaply with only relatively specialized services, maybe not the whole range of services, but undercutting the traditional firms by providing those services at very low cost on the basis of using much more heavily automated processes, for example. So there's a lot of talk about this, but there's also a lot of practice going on right now. There's a lot underway, and it's important that we understand that better, and there's a lot of scope for research in this. And one area of research is action research, where social researchers, as well as technical researchers, get involved in the process of innovation that's going on in KIBs firms. Maybe also taking the opportunity to study this in a comparative context, to look at relations between KIBs and their clients and things like that. And certainly in the case I'm looking at, we find that the KIBs firm client relationships are changing as it's able to begin to supply new services to its clients, as well as to carry out its existing services more efficiently. And what's driving them? Well, they're concerned about disruptors coming along and stealing some of their market as well. So the prospects of a lot of turmoil and churn in markets, some of which have been very long established markets, are quite considerable. A lot of opportunities for research on this. And then the last issue that I want to address is perhaps one of the crucial issues, maybe it is the crucial issue for our time. And that's the question of KIBs and sustainability. We've been hearing a great deal in the research literature about how KIBs contribute to innovation in their clients, how they're an important link in our innovation systems, helping to transfer knowledge, to fuse different sorts of knowledge, to create some new specialized knowledge, to help businesses and other organizations across the economy do things in new ways. Well, we all are going to need to do things in new ways to deal with the climate emergency. We're already having to do things in new ways to deal with the crises that are being caused by the climate emergency, with fires, with floods, and the like. But if we're to change our patterns of production and consumption so as to be more sustainable societies, a lot of innovation is going to be needed. And some of this, of course, is technological innovation, but it's also liable to involve shifts between goods and services, between changes in the ways in which we use goods and dispose of goods, changes in the ways in which we use services. And KIBs, as agents of knowledge transfer, have a very important role to play in this. And there are already some KIBs firms that brand themselves as green KIBs. We provide green consultancy, we provide green marketing and the like. But we also see that many established KIB firms have contributed to environmental, social, and governance goals. And some of these have established capabilities specifically to support clients in this process. So existing KIBs firms have also enlarged their portfolios to meet the challenges of sustainability, or at least to attempt to meet the challenges of sustainability. My own sense is that there is a great way to go here. For one thing, some clients don't really want to have to change. They want to make the minimum changes necessary to comply with regulations if they're not absolutely able to avoid regulations, which in some parts of the world that we've studied, they are. And of course, some clients are companies who support, say, continued expansion of use of fossil fuel, effectively continue pumping out of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and endangering our sustainability in that way. There's a great deal that KIBs firms can be doing in order to support the move towards sustainability, but there are some KIBs firms who are actively working to support businesses that are trying to undermine shift towards sustainability. And we saw some cases just in the news yesterday where there's efforts to divert attention from the expansion of use of fossil fuels by talking about carbon capture technologies and things like that. Okay, this application of KIBs to sustainability has largely been studied in relation to manufacturing industries, but this is something which applies across the whole economy, and it will apply to transport industries, it will apply to agricultural industries, it will apply to extractive industries as well. KIBs can provide support to all of these. There are KIBs active in all of these areas, and what's important is that we develop a green portfolio in all of these areas as well. So thank you very much. These are the 5 areas which I feel are fields for which are really, really ripe for future research. You may have other areas to add as well. I'd be very interested to hear about this. But do feel free to confront me, to disagree with me, to expand on what I'm saying, or just to ask for more, more of the ideas that underpin these insights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Miles, for your presentation. So now we have some minutes to questions, impressions, or maybe comments for the audience. Please, if somebody wants to ask Professor Miles, now they can do. Well, maybe I can start it with some questions, Professor Thanks. Okay, so again, thanks for your presentation. Um, um, what do you think about KIPs in emerging contexts where the ecosystems usually are in its infancy? They are not mature, where, for example, there are many institutional problems, maybe lack trust between agents, or maybe lack of highly specialized human capital. What do you think in this context? Keeps is very difficult to grow, or maybe to take some effect on the rest of the whole economy.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. That's a very good point. I mean, it's clear that in many emerging economies, KIBs are relatively underdeveloped. There are always some KIBs. Often they're very traditional KIBs, working in very traditional ways. So everywhere there are legal and services, for example, everywhere there's some sort of auditing, accounting services and the like. Most places will have advertising services, and many of these activities are ones where there's scope for learning from experience elsewhere. And that elsewhere doesn't necessarily mean North America and Europe. Elsewhere can mean other Latin American countries, for example, in the case of Peru, and further afield. So the success, for example, of India in developing software industries is a very interesting case. Some of the most significant software firms in the world are based in the subcontinent now. So one issue is for KIBS professionals and for people training to be KIBS professionals, and for business schools who are training people who may or may not be KIBS professionals, but may be users of KIBS in the future. They learning from experience elsewhere, and seeing what is emerging experience, what looks to be good practice, what are some of the major problems to confront, is clearly important. Educating the clients is an important issue. One of the things that we found in work I've been carrying out with colleagues in Russia is that many of the KIBS industries were not well established in Russia before the transition away from the Soviet Union. For some of them, there was no need for them. For others, the service was more or less provided by a government agency. And the new businesses that have set up there are often very unfamiliar with the idea of KIBS and what they can offer. And have had to go through quite a long, and I haven't finished going through, quite a long learning process to understand quite what their, how to go about procuring KIBS, how to say that you have a need and specify that need to the firm, understand what the KIBS firm is telling you, work with the KIBS firm when it's asking you to work with it. Don't just give it a problem and go away and hope that it will solve the problem. Basically become good clients, because good KIBS services require good suppliers and good clients to be working together. So there's general sort of raising of understanding of what these services are and what they can do. important in the society. I talked about business schools, but clearly there are other parts of higher education that can be playing a role here as well. So consultancy of one sort or another, often come from various parts of universities. And sometimes these become spun off from universities as KIBS firms in their own right. Quite a lot of environmental KIBS have actually been spun off out of universities, for example, out of technical bioscience and other areas of universities. So those of us in higher education are sometimes in a position to support the development of a KIBS sector by playing the role of KIBS in some respects ourselves. And we can get our students to do things and have our students learn about the sorts of activities that KIBS provide, and maybe the students will themselves go on and become KIBS firms. I mean, a classic example is that design students studying design in one sort of, it might be product design or architectural design or graphic design or whatever, can be doing projects for businesses. And by doing projects for businesses, they can learn about the commercial scope for offering these sorts of services. So that when they stop being students and have accumulated the skills needed to provide these services on a commercial basis, they can actually go out into the world and try doing this. I think we sometimes sort of see the university knowledge world and the commercial knowledge world as being very distinct things. And obviously they work under different demands, but there can be a lot of synergy between the two of them. And my guess is that in many emerging economies, we'll find a lot of expertise in higher education, which could actually be fostering the development and application of this sort of expertise in KIBS, in problem solving for business processes in different parts of the economy. And there's another role as well, which is that universities can also play a role in, not just studying KIBS as an abstract economic phenomenon, but in pushing them to improve the quality of their services. I mean, one area where we've been doing some work recently is looking at environmental impact analysis, and engineering firms and consulting firms are often commissioned to provide environmental impact analyses by businesses who are wanting to develop new factories or other big projects in emerging economies. I've been looking at Southeast Asia in this case. And there is nobody in government who is able to say whether the businesses are making a good job of these environmental impact assessments or not. And probably some of them are, and almost certainly some of them are not making a good job of it because they're not being properly examined. Who can examine them? There's no one in policy can do it. We could be training people that could be working as policymakers there, or we could be doing some projects of our own, examining these sorts of issues. And pressing, this is one particular case, but pushing KIBS to improve their performance. And often this will be this sort of post-colonial issue, taking account of local needs and requirements can be a very important role. So I'm not saying universities are going to ride to the rescue of the KIBS sector, but where you have expertise, then expertise can be deployed as well. It seems pretty clear that just about everywhere in the world, the KIBS sectors have been growing, They've been hit they were hit in the beginning of this century by the big financial crisis. They've been hit recently by the pandemic. But in both cases, they seem to be bouncing back. And the pandemic has pushed many KIBS firms towards much more use of methods like telephones, video conferencing, computer communications of one sort or another, which have their limitations, but which do provide the opportunity for firms in one location to reach out to users in other locations on a much greater scale than has been the case in the past. So in many countries, we'll find there are regions that are relatively disadvantaged, that there are very, very few KIBs based in that area. And this can be a problem for business development in those areas. But now maybe there's more scope to make use of KIBs from other regions, from the metropoles and the like, to acquire these sorts of services. So those are a few ideas, but quite possibly some other people here also have some ideas about how to address these questions.
Yeah. So always I try to find where is the kids or who is kids. No, it's a very complex question. How to identify them is a very quite complex. Maybe what do you think? Maybe they can have maybe some certification for identify very well. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe it's possible in this context.
Well, yes, I think it is possible. There can be problems with certification. You can have, we call red tape. You can have a lot of rules and regulations that slow your activities up. But there are some areas which are generally quite well regulated. So you have to have particular qualification to be a lawyer, for example. I guess to be a notary, you have to have particular qualifications. Accountants, usually there are associations, professional associations that provide a sort of a measure of quality assurance. That members of that association are not just people with the basic skills, but people that are well equipped to provide the service, that have committed themselves to particular professional and ethical standards in supplying the service. So this is most commonly in the old professions, so legal services and accountancy services, but also we see in many Western countries that areas like management consultancy, for example, computer services, advertising services, even lobbying services will have some sort of association that sets standards, that gives members accreditation, that gives often that would develop methods of training. They set up special interest groups which develop deeper knowledge of particular areas like new business challenges, new technologies you can be applying, things like this. These can provide clients with more trust in the services that they're acquiring. And that one of the big problems with acquiring these services is that clients often don't know which KIBs are capable of what, and how good a quality service they're going to achieve. And often there's criticism. We hear one phrase that is cowboy consultants, where consultancy organizations are but basically seems not doing the job they're meant to do. They some very senior person comes along and tells you what a wonderful job they do, and then you never see that person again once you've signed a contract with them. You get junior staff who don't seem to know what they're doing. This sort of story is very widespread. There are some surveys which suggest it's not as common as the media might make you believe, but certainly these things do happen. The KIBS firm needs to understand its clients' needs and how to deal with clients and how to communicate to clients just what is involved in the service and what is expected from the client for the service to be provided. But clients do need to have somewhere to go where they can get a sense of what are the good quality KIBS firms. What are the choices? Do I always go with the same firm to supply the same service? Or, and there could be advantages there, they will understand your firm and know its problems and know the people and the organization and things like that. But obviously you might miss out on new ideas or new approaches. Relationships can become too cozy, too close, so that people are not challenging each other and so on. So we don't have a TripAdvisor for KIBS. I thought of the idea of a KIBS advisor, but encouraging the formation of professional associations in these areas and industry associations in these areas, and encouraging the exchange of information among clients of KIBS about what sort of service they might expect from different firms and what experiences they've had, and where KIBS are useful and where it's maybe more useful to develop your own internal capabilities, hire your own in-house staff, for example, or maybe even go to a university or go to an overseas KIBS rather than a local one. Exchange of experience among users could be really, really important. And one of the good things to do with new social media is that we begin to see user communities develop in various fields. And there's a new sort of professional emerging, which is the professional online problem solver, who often will provide advice to people with particular sorts of business problems, up to the point that that advice starts becoming costly, and they suggest, well, you should have to go to a KIBS firm to do this.
Okay, excellent, good. So now we have some questions on the chat. I will write, okay, some questions, a couple of questions. For example, say, what about the relationship between creative industries and CKIBS? It could be another issue to research in the future. This is one question. What do you think?
Well, certainly, creative industries are one area where KIBS have a big role to play. Some KIBS are themselves classed as creative industries, and most important of these are design industries and advertising industries, but some others also find their way into this category. Maybe architecture is a creative industry. Many researchers will put software as a creative industry. I'm a bit more dubious about this particular case, but many creative industries are dealing directly with broader publics. They're producing things that are maybe works of art, maybe works of entertainment. There's also related topics like sport, for example. And there are, there's a lot of parallels between many creative industries and the KIBS sector. There are giant organizations, of course, in sectors like cinema and now in computer games and areas like that. But there are a very large number of very small organizations, micro businesses, individuals working. And the creative industries often organize in ways rather like the KIBS organize. So they will have their own associations, their own conferences, their own competitions and prizes and things of this sort. Creative industries have been seen as a very important source of growth in many economies. Potentially, you could pivot growth of peripheral area, for example, by industries associated with tourism. Maybe you can develop things around historical heritage of those particular areas, for example, or via setting up particular events that well, a case that pops into my mind from a discussion I had earlier today was that there's one French town, Angoulême, which has an annual festival of comic art, of graphic art, for example, which is clearly, creative industry in its own right. All of these industries need business support. There's support, legal support around intellectual property is a big topic of concern now, because there are so many ways of copying people's productions and sharing them often without their knowledge, certainly without their permission. All sorts of business management practices, because creatives often have had absolutely no training at all in business activities. If famously in several creative industries, agents have arisen who may not be always acting in the best interests of the creative producers that they're working for. So support, perhaps from consultancy firms, other managerial firms, could be rather important for the new creatives. And people in creative industries often don't consider themselves creative professionals. They consider themselves as creatives or creative artists or something similar to that. But I think they confront many of the same problems. And as we look more at the creative economy, we see that there are challenges in the creative economy which are very like the sorts of challenges that are encountered by businesses of similar sizes in other sectors of the economy. Perhaps the only real difference is that many creatives are prepared to do a lot of work on other activities while they're not yet able to earn a living from their creative activity. So famously, many people that are artists, that are actors, that are musicians and so on, are developing only a small amount of their income from these activities and having to do some other job, typically in the daytime, while they're working on this. This is a long tail phenomenon. Helping people find the right niche is important, and new digital media can often be very, very effective in this activity.
So, what do you think? Maybe it's some relationship, or maybe there are strong co-locations between both industries?
There seems to be co-location, certainly. And the work of Richard Florida and people that followed him, shows that professionals. He talked about the creative class, in fact, and his creative class included all sorts of professionals, including KIBS professionals, as well as creative artists. And one of his arguments, which I think there is quite a lot of empirical support for, is that the creative classes, which can be an important source of innovation and growth in a region, a city, an area, creative classes are often attracted to live in places where there are good creative and cultural facilities. They would rather live in places where there are art galleries, museums, theatres, etc., 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 than in places where none of these facilities are available. We can often see degrees of co-location I mean, the co-location is often very tight clustering. You will find quite a few advertising firms in the very same area, quite a few news media firms in the very same area, quite a few design firms in the same area, and so on. That's a very common pattern in cities, in big cities all around the world, as far as I'm aware. You know, people talk about agglomeration economies and the like. This seems to be a typical case. KIBs typically, you know, historically have located close to their main clients, and those KIBs that have, you know, clients in the creative industries will be particularly located close to them.
Yeah, exactly. So here I have 2 questions more for go to finish. So I will read this. Does the order of your issues you presented in are related of the importance of work,
Yeah.
or not? Is it the first? Sorry, and the second, continue, continue, and the second is, which issue would you say are the most likely to be addressed soon, and why?
Okay. On importance, I think I saved the most important one for last, sustainability, because I think this is more or less an existential question for us. You know, we don't have a long time to stop the world entering a major catastrophe. Already we have big problems, and we need all sorts of support to deal with those problems, but those problems can only get worse. And if you look at the various modeling work, it suggests that, you know, moving above the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures really puts us into a very bad position. And a whole range of crises will follow from that. You know, so countries will go underwater, migration pressures will be vast, disease will proliferate, and so on. So I would say that one is by far the most important issue. The others were not put in order of importance. The first one about comparative research was more or less a warning about taking the existing literature as being representative of the state of affairs everywhere in the world. And the other items, you know, more or less followed in terms of, okay, but then what are the research areas we need to be addressing more? The one which I think is most likely to get attention soon, so maybe this is strategically a very good topic to cover, is the topic customization and platforms, and in particular the notion of platforms, because there is a lot of interest in different sorts of platforms developing from all sorts of fields, and some of it is from economists, some of it is from people working in technology, some of it is from people working in sociology. There is a lot of confusion about just what is being meant by platforms. We need to differentiate between different sorts of platform. I mean, some platforms are not particularly technology enabled. They're not new technology. Some are long established platforms. Some are virtual platforms that are made possible through new information technology. But there are lots of very different sorts of platforms. And in the KIBs firms that I was talking about, well, these platforms are generally a platform that the firm itself constructs for clients to access different resources within the firm. But there are many other sorts of platforms available. One which has a lot of attention right now is the two-sided or many-sided platforms, where the platform allows different clients, different customers to make contact with different suppliers, different producers. And, you know, these are electronic marketplaces, essentially. But there are yet other sorts of platforms emerging where we may have technology platforms. So, for example, common platforms for reporting things on. I mentioned ESG, economic and social governance, a little while ago. Around the world, there are well over 100 different ESG systems around. This makes it very difficult to make any serious judgments about the performance of organizations in terms of these parameters. So, yeah, hopefully what we will see in the future is the emergence of a common platform, a common set of standards, common reporting mechanisms, a portal where it's possible to go to access information about the performance of different sort of organizations on that. So that sort of platform as a common information resource is yet another sort. And there are many more different sorts of platforms. There's a lot of attention going on concerning different sorts of platforms and how to use them for different purposes. And I think that makes it a very, very ripe field for business studies, for management studies, for economic studies, as well as for technical studies. And there's a lot of scope for action research. And platforms emerge in different ways in different cultures. So comparative research as well.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Miles, for your master conference. Is for me and for us is quite interesting, and I am sure we have some many challenges to do in the future, especially in our context here. So it was all questions. We are now in time. Again, thank you very much for your presentation.
It was an honor to be invited. I'm very happy to speak with you.
Okay, thank you. The audience, thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. And we will soon continue in the next event. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. And thanks for the help with the PowerPoints.
Okay, see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.